On the day my sister entered the palace, I watched the wheels of her carriage roll over the flagstones. Then I went into the study and pushed the account books in front of father. My sister is gone. I'll take over. Father stared at me for a long time. What do you want? The account books, and the keys to the caravan. He didn't give it to him, but 3 months later, when 3 ships sailed into the open sea, the hand holding his wine cup froze in midair. The sea wind poured into the cabin. Zhan asked where we were headed. I folded up the last batch of accounts and said 2 words. Forward. Main text. A section of crimson sleeve appeared in the bronze mirror. Zhan's hand froze in midair, the hairpin not yet secured. Outside, hurried footsteps came in a steady patter. Nanny Zhang was urging everyone along. Is elder sister up? The eldest young lady has been sitting before her dressing table since before dawn. Aunt Zhang personally brought her ginseng soup. I brushed Zhan's hand aside and pressed the hairpin into my bun myself. As I rose, my gaze swept over the stack of documents on the desk. The topmost sheet was the traveling inspection credential sent by the Ministry of Rites yesterday, with Jiang Shuyue's birth invitation tucked beneath it. Second young lady, Zhan caught up with me. You haven't changed your clothes yet. No rush. I left the room and turned east, circling around the covered walkway. I did not head toward Shuyu's courtyard. Jiang Huixi's study was on the west side of the main courtyard, and at this hour he should be receiving a guest. Sure enough, before I had even passed through half an open moon gate, I heard voices coming from inside. They were speaking in hushed tones, but words like tribute porcelain and quota still drifted out. I did not slow down, turning straight into the passage leading to the storeroom. Uncle Yuan was squatting on the threshold tying his shoelaces. When he saw me arrive, he paused, then used the doorframe to help himself to his feet. Second miss? What brings you here? Uncle Yuan, did sister's credentials and name card for the selection pass through the storeroom yesterday? Yes. I wouldn't dare be careless with first Mrs. things. This old servant checked them off the register personally. There was also a bundle of traveling clothes inside, all sent. Are the tally and name register still in the storeroom? Uncle Yuan rubbed his hands. The eldest young lady said she wanted to check them one more time. Last night, she had Chuanxing bring them back and said she'd collect them again this morning. He pointed to the long table in the inner room. They're sitting up there. The people from the Ministry of Rites haven't come to collect them yet. I nodded and stepped over the threshold. A sandalwood box sat on the long table, its seal intact. I lifted the seal. Inside were Jiang Shuyue's birthdate card, the accompanying tally, and a draft palace entry application form printed by the Ministry of Rites. The final column on the form read Recommender, and Jianghua ISI's name and seal had already been affixed. I drew another sheet of paper from my sleeve. It had been folded neatly, and when unfolded, it proved to be a recommendation form in the same format, with only the recommender's column left blank. Last night, I found father's name seal in the wastepaper basket in his study and took an impression from it. Once stamped, I wouldn't say it was a perfect match, but it was at least 90% convincing. Second miss, what are you? Uncle Yuan. I turned my head, my tone as even as if I were commenting on the fine weather. Elder sister ran a fever all night, and when she got up this morning, her throat was so hoarse she couldn't speak. Concubine Zhang thought it best not to make an announcement for now, fearing that alarming the Ministry of Rites officials might make matters worse. She sent me to bring over the verification document and see whether there was any way to delay things. Uncle Yuan's brows furrowed. Eldest Miss is ill? I was making my rounds last night and saw the light in eldest Miss's room burning until well past midnight. I thought she was rushing to finish some embroidery. Go take a look up ahead and see whether father's side has dispersed. Come back and tell me. Uncle Yuan opened and closed his mouth, but in the end asked no more questions. He turned and walked out through the passageway. I lowered my head and pulled out Jiang Shuyue's name card, replacing it with my own. I moved the birth month back by a year and changed the entry for place in the family line from eldest legitimate to second legitimate. The ink from this brush was indistinguishable from that used by the Ministry of Rights. I had tested it more than 10 times last night. The verification documents and the duplicate form were put back in place, and the sandalwood box was sealed again. When I straightened up, the first crow came from the east. Zhan stopped Uncle Yuan at the second gate and said something to him. When Uncle Yuan came back, his steps were more hurried than when he had left. Seeing me return the sandalwood box to its original place on the side table, he did not even have time to catch his breath before saying, "Second miss, the Ministry of Rights carriage has already arrived outside the main gate. The master is accompanying them as they speak." Has eldest miss still not finished having her makeup done? Whether she can finish her makeup in time depends on whether the people from the Ministry of Rights can afford to wait. I walked around him and out through the passageway, only to run straight into Zhan Yinyang, who was hurrying this way with 2 matrons. She was wearing a brand new lotus fruit-colored jacket today, with a red gold hairpin in her hair, but her steps had lost their usual composure. "Xuan? What are you doing here? Where is your sister's calling card?" "Uncle Yuan, Auntie." I stepped aside to let her pass. "The calling card is on the long table, and the seal hasn't been touched. The Ministry of Rights officials have arrived. You should go greet them out front." I headed toward the main courtyard. As I passed through the hanging flower gate, I heard Jiang Huaixi's laughter coming from the front, the sort of laughter used to deal with officials, 3 parts ingratiating and 7 parts putting on a show of confidence. The Ministry of Rights officials had loud voices and were saying the usual platitudes, things like, "Your daughter is blessed with both beauty and talent. Once she enters the palace, she is sure to make a spectacular impression." I did not head for the main hall. I passed through the west wing and circled around to the study's rear window. The window was ajar, and several ledgers lay spread across the desk inside. I recognized the cover of the one on top, the comprehensive record of overseas income and expenditure, year 7 of Longcheng. It was the item Jiang Huaixi had locked in a secret compartment last year during the 12th lunar month. He always wore the key ring at his waist and never let it out of his sight. But last night he had hosted the Ministry of Rights director and was so drunk that 2 young servants had carried him back. The keys had fallen onto the footstool while he was changing clothes. I picked them up, used them, and hung them back again, all within the time it takes to drink a cup of tea. 2 sheets of paper were tucked inside the ledger. The accounts at the front were neatly prepared, but on the page for the July South Seas route, an entry for losses from storms had been forcibly rewritten as losses sustained at sea, with the figure changed from 300 taels to 12. Those 12 taels had then been split off under ship-hand purchases for the Western Ocean route. Jiang Huaixi thought he had made it foolproof. The sound of chairs being moved came from the main hall. I stepped back half a pace and slipped in through the rear door of the study. The booklet was still where it had been, as was the demand for payment on the tribute porcelain advance, pasted there half a year ago. It was dated the end of last month. 3 months earlier, Jiang Huaixi had accepted a deposit from the authorities and promised to deliver a batch of celadon by year's end, but the first 2 ships had returned empty-handed. The remaining balance was still outstanding, and with interest compounding, it had already doubled the original price. The sound of the door curtain being lifted. "What are you doing here?" Jiang Huaixi stood inside the threshold, with half the hem of a Ministry of Rights official's robe visible behind him. The smile had not yet fully faded from his face. The instant he saw me, it stiffened, and he immediately lowered his voice. "Did you send your elder sister's calling card? They're pressing us hard up front." "Sent." "That's good." He sighed with relief and walked toward the desk. His gaze paused slightly when it fell on the booklet. "Go back and change your clothes. In a little while, see your sister off." "Father." I stood there without moving. Jiang Huaixi turned back and finally looked at me properly. He saw the ink stain on my sleeve, then noticed the pen that had somehow appeared in my hand, the one from the desk, stained with vermilion ink from approving the urgent order for the tribute porcelain. The balance for the tribute porcelain was due 3 months ago. The color drained from Jiang Huaixi's face. What did you say? The storm damage on the Nanyang shipment in July came to 12 taels. The remaining 288 taels went toward purchasing crewmen for the western route, but the ship for that route never even left port. I pushed the payment demand toward him. What are you going to use to pay the sailors' wages for the past 6 months? The study was so quiet that the sound of the Ministry of Rights officials drinking tea in the front hall could be heard. Jiang Huaixi reached for the paperweight on the desk. It was made of bluestone and, swung with force, could shatter a person's brow. But I did not retreat. His hand stopped in midair because Zhan Yinyang's shrill voice rang out from beyond the rear window, "The calling card is wrong." Jiang Huaixi's hand fell back onto the desk. You changed the calling card? Last night, elder sister knelt before the Buddha all night, and it was only at dawn that Aunt Zhang helped her back. She doesn't want to enter the palace, father can't see that. You, Jiang Huaixi pointed at me, his finger trembling. What are you trying to do? Do you know that the livelihood of everyone in this household, hundreds of mouths, depends on that quota of tribute porcelain? If your elder sister enters the palace and wins favor, can the authorities still make things difficult for us? Whether elder sister can win favor after entering the palace is her business. I raised my eyes to look at him. How are we going to make up the shortfall from the tribute porcelain, and where will the boatman's wages come from? I can take care of it. Jiang Huaixi froze for 2 breaths, as if digesting the meaning of those words. Then he let out a scoff, his laughter carrying a panic he hadn't managed to hide in time. You can take care of it? You, a sheltered young lady. How many years have you worn the caravan's keys around your waist? Have you ever counted? How many times a year do you check the accounts Han Chi submits? 3 ships losing more than 10% of their cargo on every voyage, and you think the sea wind carried it away? Jiang Huaixi stopped laughing. Big sister is gone. Someone has to take over this whole mess. I took the master ledger of income and expenditures from his desk and tucked it under my arm. As I turned, I heard the bluestone paperweight behind me being slammed hard onto the desk, making the teacups clink. Jiang Shuwan, father. I stopped at the threshold without turning around. The calling card has already been sent to the Ministry of Rights carriage. Even if you chase after it now, you won't get it back. I'll take the ledger to look over first. Once you've thought things through, we'll talk. By the time Jiang Huaixi caught up to the second gate, I had already passed through the hanging flower gate. Chun Zhan followed behind, clutching the master ledger of income and expenditures. Her steps were quick and hurried, and she asked in a hushed voice, "Miss, where are we going?" The accounts office behind the storeroom. Second miss? This ledger, do you recognize it? I do. Han Chi set down his knife and stood, brushing the dust from his knees. Last 12th month, the master had this old servant check it over once. Once I was done, it was locked away. Where did second miss get it? From the study desk. I did not beat around the bush. I opened the ledger to the page for the 7th month's Nanyang voyage and pushed it in front of him. When you checked it, did you notice anything about the storm damage loss? Han Chi lowered his head and glanced at it, his gaze lingering on the line of figures for a moment. He said nothing. He had started out as a bosun. Matters at sea could not be hidden from him. The loss of 300 taels had been recorded as 12 taels, and the difference was enough to cover a ship's provisions for 2 voyages. I could tell. If you could tell, why didn't you say anything? I did. Han Chi lifted his eyelids and glanced at me. After I spoke up, Master told this old servant to concern himself only with the ships from then on, and not with the accounts. He said it very calmly, but there was anger smoldering beneath that calm. A man who had spent more than 20 years at sea, gagged and forbidden to speak about matters at sea, the wrinkles carved into his face by the ocean wind had all drawn taut. I didn't ask any further. I turned the booklet to the page on the western routes and pointed to the small print on the last line. That ship on the western route flew its flag last October, but you should have the departure records. Did it actually leave port? No. Why not? The ship reached the wharf, and half the cargo had been loaded when the master had it brought back. He said the salt permit hadn't been approved, so it couldn't sail. The salt license was never approved, yet the accounts show an expense for boatman's provisions. Han Chi fell silent. Footsteps sounded outside the door. It was Uncle Yuan. He did not come in, but stopped outside the door curtain and said, "Second miss, master asks you to go to the main hall." What is it about? He didn't say. He only asked this old servant to come fetch you. I closed the ledger and handed it to Zhan. Put it back on the storage room desk and lock it up. Then I rose and headed outside. When I passed Han Chi, I paused. You're coming with me. Han Chi was momentarily stunned. He usually stayed in the accounting office and at the docks. A place like the main hall was not somewhere he had any business being. But after glancing at the ledger in my hand, he ultimately asked no questions. He tucked the sharpened short blade back behind his waist and followed me. 3 people were seated in the main hall. Jiang Huaisher occupied the seat of honor, with a cup of tea gone completely cold beside him, untouched. Below him sat a middle-aged man in a sapphire blue changshan. His face was unfamiliar, but official patterns were embroidered discreetly along his cuffs. The other man I knew, Lu Xian, a palace eunuch responsible for purchasing goods from Jiangnan. He spent the year traveling between Suzhou and Yangzhou, and every year Jiang Huaisher had to have the initial inspection of the tribute porcelain pass through his hands. Lu Xian saw me enter, his gaze lingered on me for a moment before he smiled. Master Jiang, who is this? My second daughter. Oh, Lu Xian drawled, lifting his teacup for a sip. I heard there's happy news at your residence today. The eldest young lady has entered the palace. Congratulations. As for the tribute porcelain. The tribute porcelain can wait, I said. Jiang Huaisi suddenly turned to look at me, his lips pressed into a thin line. Lu Xian, however, seemed intrigued. He set down his teacup and looked me up and down. Second Miss Jiang, you understand tribute porcelain? I don't, I said. But I do know that the quota for tribute porcelain must be fulfilled before the end of the year. Otherwise, the Jiang family's name will no longer appear on next year's list of officially commissioned suppliers. The smile faded somewhat from Lu Xian's face. Having been in this business for a long time, he could tell whether someone's words carried any substance. What I had said was not something an outsider could have known. The matter of the list was a rule known only within the imperial household. Merchants outside merely knew that failing to deliver would incur a fine. They did not know they could also be struck off the list. Master Jiang? Lu Xian turned his gaze toward Jiang Huaisi. Did you ask second miss to say this? Jiang Huaisi's face turned from green to white. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something to smooth things over, but I had already handed over what I was holding, a sheet of paper. It was the preliminary review record for the tribute porcelain that I had dug out of the old archives in the storehouse last night. The year listed was last year, and Lu Xian's signature was at the bottom. Eunuch Lu, during last year's preliminary review, the designs and quantities of the tribute porcelain matched. Why has the quota suddenly been raised by 30% this year? Lu Xian took it and glanced at it, the smile on his face disappearing completely. He looked at me, then at Jiang Huaisi, and slowly folded the record before placing it back on the table. Second Miss Jiang, you have a sharp eye. This year's quota was ordered from above. Those below only need to carry it out. As for why it was raised by 30%. He stood up and dusted off the hem of his robe. Master Jiang should know the reason. After saying that, he cupped his hands in farewell and turned to leave. As he passed me, he lowered his voice. "Second miss, if you have time, come sit at the Yulai tea house one of these days." He left. Only Jiang Huaisha and I remained in the main hall along with Han Qi, who had been standing silently by the door the entire time. Jiang Huaisha arose, walked around the desk, and came to stand before me. He was a head taller than I was. When he looked down at me, his shadow could completely envelop me. "Do you know who Lucian is? Do you know that what you just said could block our family's path entirely?" "Father." I looked up at him. "The road is already half blocked. The tribute porcelain quota has been raised by 30%, and if we can't deliver the goods, the Jiang family will be struck off the rolls next year. Do you think sister entering the palace will settle this? She's only just left, the palace's reach hasn't extended to the procurement of tribute porcelain yet." Jiang Huaixi raised a hand and pressed it against the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "What are you trying to do? This morning you changed the name cards, took the account books, and undermined me in front of Lucian. What exactly do you want?" "I want the key to the caravan." "Dream on." 3 months, I said. "Give me 3 months and I'll make up the shortfall on the tribute porcelain. If I can't, this ledger goes back into the secret compartment exactly as it is, and I won't set foot outside my chambers ever again." Jiang Huaixi stared at me. He was calculating how big a storm the things in my hands could stir up, and how many cards he still had left that I hadn't uncovered. Han Qi suddenly spoke. "Master." Jiang Huaixi turned his head. "Last night, second miss had someone deliver the records of the ship on the western route that failed to leave port last year into this old servant's hands." Han Qi's voice was not loud, but every word was as steady as a rivet driven into the ship's planks. "If anyone traces that route upward, this old servant can corroborate her testimony." The color drained completely from Jiang Huaishi's face. He looked at me, then at Han Qi, the man who had followed him for over 20 years yet had taken my side within less than half an hour of my entering the accounting office. "Han Qi, you." "My lord, I've spent half my life sailing the seas. I won't mistake a person." Han Qi said, "For second miss to dare say those things in front of Lucian, she knows exactly what she's doing." Jiang Huaixi's hand slid down from the edge of the table. He took a step back, retreating to the chair behind him, and slowly sat down, as though all the strength had been drained from his legs. He remained silent for a long time, so long that the sunlight outside the hall shifted from the threshold to the spaces between the bricks, before he finally spoke, his voice hoarse, like sandpaper scraping across wood. 3 months. If you can't make up the shortfall, go back to wherever you came from. You are not to touch anyone in the accounting office. Han Qi will only assist you in checking the accounts. He is not to leave port." "Where are the keys?" Jiang Huaixi removed the ring of keys from his waist, clenching them in his hand again and again before finally slamming them down hard on the table. "Take them." When I picked up the keys, my fingertips brushed against their cold iron teeth. I counted them one by one: the storeroom, the accounting office, the dock warehouse, and the fleet dispatch room. 4 in total, with the one for the ship's hold missing. "Where's the key to the ship's hold?" "The key to the ship's hold is with Han Qi." I turned to look at Han Qi. Han Qi pulled another key from behind his waist. It was made of brass, a full circle larger than the others, with a faint wave pattern engraved on it. "Second miss, how far can this ship go? This old servant will take the helm for you." "I didn't take the key." "Keep the key to the hold with you for now. Once I've negotiated the first shipment, hand it over to me." Han Qi froze for a moment, then tucked the key back behind his waist and nodded. Jiang Huaixi sat in the chair, watching this unfold. His lips moved, but in the end, he said nothing. I turned and left the main hall. Zhan was waiting beneath the corridor, holding the master ledger of income and expenditures. I had pressed an extra crease into its cover, the mark left when I lived through it last night. My memories from my previous life told me that the page corresponding to this crease concealed the true amount Lucien had siphoned from the tribute porcelain. Miss, what shall we do next? Go to the docks. The wind at the docks was stronger than in the residence, carrying the fishy smell of the water. Hanchi walked ahead, and I followed him through the warehouse piled high with burlap sacks, my feet treading on damp flagstones. Zhan chased after us, panting for breath, still clutching the master in-command expense ledger, whose cover creases had grown deeper and deeper. Second miss, this way. Hanchi stopped in front of a low shed and lifted half of the oilcloth curtain. These are the warehouse's underlying accounts. Every month's incoming and outgoing goods are recorded. What would you like to check? The transactions with the government-run textile bureau, from last year and the year before. Hanchi dragged a wooden chest out of the shed and lifted the lid. Inside was a thick stack of slips, their pages softened by the damp. I crouched down and began sorting through them, pressing a finger against the corner of each sheet as I went. In his previous life, when Sun Maokai approached Jiang Huixi, it was the end of September. The tribute satin in storage had already been sitting there for 2 years. If it was not sold soon, it would have to be written off as a loss. Under the rules for government-run operations, goods that remained unsold for more than 3 years were recorded at half their value. Sun Maocai's batch would reach the 3-year mark at the end of this year. He was desperate because he would have to make up half the difference himself. But now it was June. There were still 3 months. How were the tribute satins from the Weaving Bureau usually distributed in previous years? Hanchi thought for a moment. They went by the official route, escorted north by the Weaving Bureau. But the patterns haven't changed in the past 2 years, and the north had long since become saturated, so a batch was left piled up in storage. How much did he lay in? I heard it's quite a lot. Sun Maokai is keeping the exact figure tightly under wraps and won't tell anyone. I stood up and dusted off my hands. I had dealt with Sun Maokai once in my previous life. He was timid, profit-hungry, and tight-lipped, but he had one weakness: he was afraid people would find out that his inventory was about to be sold off at a loss. Hanchi, do you know anyone at the docks who can get a message into the Weaving Bureau? Yes. Hanchi glanced at me. But Sun Maokai is difficult to negotiate with. The master sent people to him before, and he wouldn't even show his face. He doesn't need to show his face. I had Hanchi arrange for someone to deliver a message through the back door of the Weaving Bureau, at the ULI tea house east of the city. At 5:15 in the afternoon, someone would be asking about the price of a batch of old satin. That afternoon, after the message was delivered, I changed into plain clothes and did not bring Zhan, merely having Hanchi wait outside the tea house. ULI was Lu Xian's territory. The man had many informants and kept his mouth shut, so Sun Maokai would dare to come only if the business was discussed at his establishment. As the hour of the rooster had just arrived, half of a round face peered out from the stairwell. Sun Maokai was wearing a somewhat worn gray-brown robe, with the buttons fastened incorrectly and ink stains on his cuffs, as though he had hurried over straight from the accounting office. He stood at the stairwell and glanced around. When he saw me sitting alone in the corner, he froze for a moment, then turned to leave. Steward Sun. He stopped in his tracks. 3-year-old designs. Leave them sitting for another 3 months, and they'll have to be booked at half value. Can you afford to make up the difference yourself? Sun Maokai turned around. His face was arranged into a smile, but it was stiff. Only after pressing his lips together twice did he manage to speak, and this young lady is from the second branch of the Jiang family. You don't need to know who I am. I have a ship heading to Nanyang, sailing before the end of the year. That batch of tribute satin in your warehouse, no one has asked about it for 2 years. I'll buy it at 60% of market price, paid in cash on the spot. Sun Maocai's eyes narrowed slightly. 60% was a full 10 percentage points higher than booking it at half value, but 20% below what he had originally paid. He had already been losing money on this shipment for 2 years. Recovering even 10% was better than nothing. 60%? Sun Maokai rubbed his hands together. Miss, you must be joking. Tribute satin is government property. It can't be handled privately. Under government regulations, before goods are written off at a reduced value, they can first be reassigned. As long as the books say transferred to Nanyang for trial sale, and you submit the shipping documents before the end of the year, the matter will be settled on your end. Sun Maokai stopped smiling. He stared at me for quite a while as though trying to determine from my plain-colored clothes and my age whether I was truly in a position to make such a decision. Can you count out the silver on the spot, miss? Yes. How many horses? How many horses do you have? Sun Maokai was silent for a moment, then held up 3 fingers. 300 bolts. Han Chi had been waiting for me outside the tea house for an hour and a half. By the time I came out, dusk was settling in. I handed him a written advance purchase contract. 300 bolts at 60% of the listed price, payment in silver upon delivery. Go back and withdraw the money from the accounts, then deliver it to the rear entrance of the Textile Administration first thing tomorrow morning. Han Chi took the contract and glanced over it. His gaze moved back and forth twice between 300 bolts and 60%. He looked up at me. Second, miss, if 300 bolts of goods end up sitting on our hands because they can't be sold, we can get out, I said, but we'll have to find someone to build us a way. Han Chi did not ask anything further. He folded the contract, tucked it into his breast, and turned toward the docks. I watched his back disappear at the mouth of the alley, then headed in the opposite direction, to the Yangzhou Guild Hall where Lu Jingji was staying. Lu Jingji occupied the most secluded room in the west wing of the guild hall. A pair of half-dry cloth shoes hung outside the door, and a bean-sized flame glowed through the window. I knocked. It was some time before footsteps sounded inside. The door opened a crack, and a long, thin face peered out. Seeing a young woman standing outside, Lu Jingji frowned slightly. Who are you looking for? Boss Lu. I heard you have a salt certificate route to Yangzhou that can get past the checkpoints without paying tolls. Lu Jingji's brow remained furrowed, but he opened the door a little wider and turned sideways to let me in. The room contained only a table, a chair, and a narrow bed. Spread across the table was half of an unfinished letter, asking his family for money, judging by the hurried handwriting. Where did you hear that, miss? Salt certificate routes concern the salt trade and have nothing to do with cloth. Not on the surface. But in used salt certificate quotas can be used to transport goods, and once the goods reach Yangzhou, they can be resold. Fur merchants from the north have recently been buying satin in Yangzhou, specifically old patterns, because new patterns are too expensive, making them unprofitable to sell on the steppe. Lu Jingji sat back down in his chair and stroked his chin. The young lady knows quite a bit. But does the young lady know how much it costs to grease the checkpoints along the way when using the salt certificate route to transport goods? I do. So after the goods are sold in Yangzhou, you'll get 20% of the profits. Lu Jingji smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. 20% of the profits, and you think you can use my salt certificate route? Young lady, I bought this route with my life. 20%. 300 bolts of tribute satin, bought at 60% of its value. Resell them in Yangzhou to fur merchants from the north, and you'll make at least double. With 20% of the profits, you'll net an amount equal to 30% of the goods' value. The capital in your hands is only enough for one trip carrying scraps of cloth. I placed a copy of the pre-purchase contract on the table. Boss Lu, how many letters have you written home from this room asking for money? Lu Jingji's smile faded. He lowered his eyes to the contract on the table, then looked back at me and tapped his fingers twice against his knee. How will you guarantee that the goods won't be detained before they reach Yangzhou? My people will ship them to Zhenjiang. For the remaining overland route, we'll use your salt certificate channels. If anyone stops us along the way, we'll say they reincidental miscellaneous goods accompanying the salt certificates, not smuggling, at most supplementary cargo. There are rules for supplementary cargo too. If the amount carried along exceeds 30%, it has to be reported. Then report it. Report each one separately, so the books stay clean and there's nothing to fear if anyone comes looking. Lu Jingji stood up and paced around the room twice. He walked very slowly, stopping at the window each time to glance at the dark alley outside, as if calculating whether this move was worth betting on. At last, he stopped in front of me. 20%, but once the goods arrive in Yangzhou, I'll deal with the fur merchants myself. You are not to show your face. Deal. I held out my hand. Lu Jingji stared at it blankly for a moment, then reached out and shook it. His palm was calloused from years of hauling goods. On the way back, I closed my eyes for a while in the carriage. In my previous life, Lu Jingji later left with a caravan heading north, departing so quietly that no one knew where he had gone. But in this life, he was still in Yangzhou, still living in this side room, and still in need of this money to turn his fortunes around. Zhan knocked on the carriage window from outside. Miss, we're home. I opened my eyes. A corner of the carriage curtain had been lifted, and the lanterns in front of the Jiang residence were already lit. Jiang Huixi stood beneath the entrance portico, clutching a letter in his hand. The ugly look on his face was visible from half a street away. When he saw me get out of the carriage, he crumpled the letter into a ball and threw it at his feet. You went to find Sun Maokai? I did. You even went to see Lu Jingji? I did. Jiang Huixi drew a deep breath, his shoulders taut as though they might burst. You spent the hard cash from my account. 300 bolts of satin are tied up in this. If anything goes wrong before the goods reach Yangzhou, father. I stepped onto the stairs and paused as I passed him. Come back and check in 3 months. Jiang Huixi's letter arrived 3 days later. The letter was neatly folded, its seal secured with wax. When Han Qi brought it back from the wharf, he said the messenger had come from the palace and was wearing boots from the inner court. I opened it, read it, and left it on the table untouched. Zhan craned her neck to take a look and blurted out, the eldest young lady has been made a caravan? I nodded and folded the letter back up. Jiang Shiyue's handwriting was just like her, neat and orderly, every stroke precise and proper. The letter said that all was well since entering the palace. During her audience before the throne, the emperor had asked her a few questions about the scenery and customs of Jiangnan, and she had answered with composure. At the end, she added, as for matters at home, please rest assured, father. If my younger sister encounters any difficulties, she may write to me. She did not mention what had happened on the night before she entered the palace. Nor did she mention that she had not wanted to go. Han Qi was leaning against the accounting office door waiting. When he saw me fold the letter, he asked, do the palace affairs have anything to do with us? Not for now. I put the letter away in the drawer. But they will soon. Zhang Yinyang hosted a banquet that very afternoon. The banquet was held in the main hall. She invited the wives and daughters of several household stewards, as well as the female members of merchant families from the 2 alleys nearby who did business with the Jiang family. Zhang Yinyang changed into a rose-red jacket, tucked a new Dian-Cui hairpin into her hair by the temple, and sat in the seat of honor, smiling until the corners of her mouth stiffened, yet unwilling to stop. When I entered, her smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly propped it back up. Xuan, you're here? Have a seat. Today is your elder sister's happy day. Though we can't congratulate her in person, we should still celebrate here at the residence. That's exactly right, Auntie. I chose a seat by the window. On the table were 8 plates of fruit, 4 kinds of pastries, and a pot of warmed huadiao wine. Zhang Yinyang poured a round of wine for everyone present, then turned the conversation toward me. Come to think of it, Shuan has been awfully busy lately, running out all day long. Anyone who didn't know better might think our household had changed its chief steward. The ladies present all laughed, politely. I smiled as well. You're teasing me, Auntie. I'm only helping Father sort through some old accounts. Old accounts? Zhang Yinyang paused with the wine cup at her lips. What old accounts? Aren't the accounts of our household managed by your father and Han Chi? Yes, so I'm just sorting them out. Zhang Yinyang did not say anything more, but the kingfisher feather hairpin trembled when she set down her wine cup. I knew she understood. She knew I had taken the key from Jiang Huaishe, and that I had gone to find Sun Maokai and Lu Jingji. It was simply that she could not tear off the mask at today's banquet. After the banquet ended, I followed the corridor toward the rear courtyard, but halfway there I was stopped by Uncle Yuan. Second miss, Master asked this old servant to convey a message to you. What message? The person who brought word from the palace said he could help us ease the tribute porcelain quota. The condition is that you must let Lu Xian buy into the route to Yangzhou in your hands. I stopped in my tracks. Uncle Yuan lowered his head, as though he himself felt these words should not be passed on. But he still delivered the message. The master said that if you agree, he can negotiate with the palace regarding the tribute porcelain, and the matter between you and Lu Jingji can also be left untouched for the time being. If you refuse. What happens if I refuse? The master did not say explicitly. But when this old servant came from the storeroom, I saw Han Chi being summoned to the main hall. I did not return to the rear courtyard. Instead, I turned and headed for the main hall. Han Chi stood beneath the steps outside the hall, holding a scroll of something in his hands. When he saw me approaching, he turned his head and glanced inside. Is the master inside? He is. Lu Xian's men are there too. What did they say? Lu Xian sent word that once that batch of tribute silk reaches Yangzhou, he wants 1/3 of the profits. Otherwise, the goods will be seized when they dock at Zhenjiang. I stood still at the bottom of the steps. Darkness fell early, and the main hall was lit, its glow seeping through the crack beneath the door and stretching into a thin, elongated strip of light across the blue stone paving. How did Lu Xian know the goods were going through Zhenjiang? Han Chi was silent for a moment. This old servant didn't say anything. Nor would Lu Jingji's people. Then father must have told him. Han Chi didn't respond. That was as good as an admission. I stepped up onto the stairs. Jiang Huaixi was seated behind the desk, reading a document. Hearing the door open, he looked up at me and closed it. Uncle Yuan told you? He did. What are you planning, then? I walked over and stopped in front of the desk. Lu Xian can have the 30% profit share he wants. Jiang Huaixi raised an eyebrow, apparently not expecting me to agree so readily. But he'll have to do 2 things in return for that 30%. First, I want to see the actual document approving the deferment of the tribute porcelain quota, not just a verbal promise. Second, he must personally send someone to escort a shipment to Zhenjiang. If anything goes wrong between the cargo docking at Zhenjiang and its transfer to overland transport, he will take full responsibility. Jiang Huaixi fell silent for a few moments. You know what kind of person Lu Xian is, and you're talking to him about taking responsibility? He knows better than I do how much he's skimmed from the tribute porcelain trade over the years. Whether he takes responsibility isn't up to him. He'll only get his share of the money after the goods reach Yangzhou and are sold, and if he can't even protect them along the stretch from Zhenjiang to Yangzhou, whether he gets that 3% cut is up to me. Jiang Huaixi stared at me, as if recalculating how many cards I still had in my hand. Your sister has been made a talented lady, which means we'll have someone in the palace from now on. If you and Lu Xian burn that bridge, father. I interrupted him. How long were you happy after receiving the news that my sister had been made a talented lady? Jiang Huaixi's expression darkened. There are still 9 ranks above a talented lady. It'll take your sister at least 3 years to establish herself in the palace. For those 3 years, she won't be able to reach into the tribute porcelain procurement. Lu Xian is using the tribute porcelain to hold us hostage now, and it has nothing to do with whether or not your sister enters the palace. Han Qi's voice came from outside the door. Second miss, someone from Lu Jingji is here. I turned and walked out. The bundle in Han Qi's hand had been sent by Lu Jingji. Unrolled, it was a receipt from Yangzhou. The 300 bolts of tribute satin had passed the first checkpoint, the salt distribution license route had been opened, and no one had stopped the goods when they were loaded onto carts in Zhenjiang. Lu Jingji says the fur merchants from the north have already inspected the goods and made an offer. Han Qi lowered his voice. They're offering more than double what we paid for them. I didn't take the receipt. I only glanced at the date on it. The 3-month deadline was still 2.5 months away. Han Qi, go back to Lu Xian and tell him this. We can discuss a 30% share, but first he must deliver the document approving the delayed shipment of the tribute porcelain to Jiang Huaixi's desk. Until that document arrives, he won't receive a single copper from the money earned selling the goods in Yangzhou. Han Qi nodded and turned toward the mouth of the alley. I stood on the steps, watching his figure disappear into the night. The wind made the lanterns along the covered walkway sway. Zhan caught up from behind, holding a letter. A tiny plum blossom seal was pressed into the wax sealing the envelope. Miss, this was just slipped through the crack beneath the door. It has your name on it. I opened it. The handwriting on the letter was thin, elongated, and hurried, as though it had been written in haste. It contained only one sentence: the buyers from the north are interested not only in the satin, but have also asked about the Jiang family fleet's route to Nanyang. The person asking spoke with a Kyoto accent. I folded the letter back up. There was no signature. The wind grew stronger, making the lantern sway violently, its light shattering into several fragments across the bluestone pavement. I glanced up at the still-burning lamp in the main hall, where Jiang Huixi was, and tucked the letter into my sleeve. Footsteps sounded from the end of the covered corridor. It was Uncle Yuan, carrying a tea tray, walking faster than usual. When he saw me standing on the steps, he froze for a moment and lowered his voice. Second miss, the master spoke with Lu Xian's people for another quarter of an hour just now. He looked very displeased when he came out. What did they say? This old servant didn't hear everything, but I did hear one thing. Uncle Yuan glanced to either side. Lu Xian's people said that First Miss has been assigned to serve in the Imperial Library at the palace, so she won't be able to see His Majesty for the time being. I said nothing after hearing it. Zhan opened her mouth beside me, as if she wanted to ask something, but in the end, she didn't. Uncle Yuan carried the tea tray into the main hall. The door closed behind him, and the light spilling through was blocked once more. I turned and walked toward the rear courtyard. The letter in my sleeve pressed against my wrist, its edges faintly warm. Miss? Zhan followed behind me. Should we tell Master about this? No rush. We'll talk about it after Han Qi returns. After passing through the hanging flower gate, the rear courtyard grew quiet, with only the rustling of leaves in the wind. Zhan suddenly said, Miss, the plum blossom seal on that letter just now. It looks like the kind of sealing ink used only in the palace. I paused for a moment, then continued walking forward. Miss, is it the eldest young lady? I don't know. Once we entered the courtyard, Zhan went to light the lamps. I stood by the window for a while, looking at the eaves illuminated by lantern light beyond the courtyard wall, and thought of the full 5 years Jiang Shui had spent in the library in my previous life, from Chiron to Jeyu, and from Jeyu to Jiaoyi. Every step had been taken exceedingly slowly, and every letter she sent back reported that she was safe. But even after those letters reached Jiang Huaixi, the quota for tribute porcelain continued to tighten year after year, and Lu Xian still came calling every year to demand his bribes. I drew the letter from my sleeve and held it up to the lamp to read it once more. The buyers from the north aren't only interested in the satin, they've also been asking about the routes taken by the Jiang family's fleet to Nanyang. Han Chi's footsteps paused for a moment at the mouth of the alley, then quickened. When he pushed open the door, he brought in a gust of night wind that made the flame on the table lamp shrink by half. Zhan hurriedly reached out to shield the lamp and stepped aside. Lu Jingji has sent word. Han Chi pulled a letter from inside his robe and handed it over. The goods have been sold. The fur merchant from the north paid in silver on the spot. Lu Jingji set aside 30% of the profits and sealed it in a separate chest, saying he would deliver it to you according to the rules. What about Lu Xian? The document postponing the tribute porcelain shipment has arrived on the master's desk. Han Chi paused. But the person who delivered it wasn't one of Lu Xian's men. It came directly from the palace, bearing the seal of the Imperial Household Department. My hand holding the letter paused for an instant, then I continued opening it. The letter was in Lu Jingji's handwriting. He had filled 2 densely written pages, listing in meticulous detail how the goods had been sold, the amount of silver received, and the expenses for bribing the checkpoints along the way. At the end, he had added, Miss Jiang, if you have any more goods headed to Yangzhou, come straight to me. I folded the letter and put it away in the drawer, then turned to glance at the clock in the corner, 3/4 past the hour of the boar. Han Chi, how much longer until the fleet can leave port? All 3 ships have been repaired and prepared, and the warehouses at the dock have been cleared out. Once the goods are loaded aboard, we can weigh anchor within 3 days. 3 days. Then 3 days it is. Han Chi didn't ask any further. He nodded, turned, and left. The door closed behind him, and his footsteps receded along the corridor toward the docks. Zhan stood to the side for a while before finally asking, Miss, what about that box of silver at 30% interest? Should we send it to Lu Xian? Don't. But what about the master? Lu Xian will come to collect it himself. I extinguished the lamp and walked toward the inner room. When he comes, tell him one thing, the moment the tribute satin is sold, someone will be asking about the Jiang family's shipping route to the South Seas. Pass that message on, and he'll know what to do. Zhan paused for a moment, then seemed to understand. She said nothing more. Early the next morning, before the sky had fully brightened, Uncle Yuan came knocking at the door. Second young miss, master asks you to go to the main hall. Han Chi is there too. I changed clothes and went over. 3 people were seated in the main hall. Jiang Weisha sat in the seat of honor, with the document authorizing the delayed processing of the tribute porcelain sent by Lu Xian spread out before him. Han Chi stood by the door, holding the latest cargo manifest signed at the dock. The 3rd person sat below them, wearing a somewhat worn slate blue robe. It was Lu Jingji. When Lu Jingji saw me enter, he stood and cupped his hands. Second Miss Jiang, I've come to trouble you again. Why have you come in person, Boss Lu? After the goods changed hands, the buyer from the north asked a few more questions. I thought I should tell you about it in person. Lu Jingji drew a note from his sleeve and handed it over. He wasn't asking about the goods. He was asking about the ship. He asked how many trips the Jiang family's fleet had made to the South Seas, which routes they took, and which ports they stopped at along the way. 4 characters were written on the note, South Seas route. I took it, glanced at it, and handed it to Han Chi. What else did he say after asking? He also said that if the Jiang family was willing, they could join in. The price was negotiable. Lu Jingji glanced at Jiang Huaixi, then at me. I couldn't determine how deep this person's connections ran, so I didn't agree. I only said that the owner of the goods wasn't in Yangzhou and that I'd have to ask him after he returned. Jiang Huixi coughed once from behind the desk, as if he wanted to speak, but after glancing at me, he swallowed his words. From the moment Lu Xian's document had been delivered to his desk, he should already have understood one thing: he could no longer get involved in this line of business. Boss Lu, there's no hurry. I folded the note. Once I've sorted out the fleet matters on my end, I'll discuss it with you in detail. Lu Jingji understood and said no more. He picked up his teacup and took a sip, then glanced at the manifest in Han Chi's hands and suddenly asked, "Second miss, what kind of goods does the fleet plan to ship out?" "Sail empty." Lu Jingji's hand, holding the teacup, stopped in midair. "Empty ships?" "Send 3 ships empty all the way to Nanyang, then buy local goods there and haul them back. It costs half as much as sailing out with a full cargo, and once we reach Nanyang, we'll have more flexibility. We can buy whatever goods we want without letting others dictate the price." Lu Jingji set down his teacup. Something changed in the way he looked at me, not the gaze of a business partner from before, but something else, as if, for the first time, he was truly seeing someone standing across the chessboard from him. Sailing to Nanyang with an empty ship and only taking on cargo there carries no small risk. If we can't find suitable goods to bring back once we arrive, the cost of the entire round trip will be lost on the voyage. So it depends on which route we take. I pulled the cargo manifest from Han Chi's hands and spread it across the table. Nanyang is divided into eastern and western routes. The western route passes through the Strait of Malacca and mainly carries spices, but the harvest there was poor this year, so spice prices are high. The eastern route runs through the Luzon area and mainly carries pearls, shells, and timber, low prices and large volumes, but few ports where we can put in. I looked up at Han Chi. "Which route did you usually take?" "Eastern route. I've made 5 or 6 trips, so I know the ports well." "Then take the eastern route. Once you reach Luzon, leave the ship empty and moor at the shore. Don't rush to unload the cargo. Stay at the dock for 3 days first. Wait for the local merchants to come to you and negotiate the price, then make your counteroffer." Han Chi nodded. Second Mrs. method will save half the intermediary fees compared with the routes master used to run in previous years. Jiang Huixi could no longer sit still behind the desk. He stood up, walked to the table, and looked at the unfolded cargo manifest and the route I had newly marked on it. His lips moved slightly. "Your line, father." Jiang Huixi's voice caught. "The fleet's key is already in my hands. I no longer need to consult you about which way to go from here. But once the results are in, the accounts will be delivered to your desk on schedule, with every expense and receipt clearly recorded." Jiang Huixi swallowed the second half of his sentence. 3 days later, at the pier. It had just dawned, and the sails of all 3 ships had already been raised. Han Chi stood at the bow of the lead ship, holding the copper key, the key to the ship's hold. I hadn't accepted it in Chapter 2. It was only at this moment that he truly placed it in my hands. "Second miss, the door to the hold is open. All the cargo space inside has been cleared out, and we can load the goods at any time. Do not load the cargo. The ship leaves empty." Han Chi handed over the key. "Then you keep this key yourself." As I took the key, the wind blew in from the sea, carrying a salty, fishy smell. Footsteps sounded from the pier behind me. It was Uncle Yuan, running up breathlessly with a letter raised in his hand. "Second young miss. The master asked this old servant to deliver this." I opened the letter. Jiang Huixi's handwriting was much more hurried than usual, as though he had been rushing to finish it. The letter went on and on, repeating that it isn't safe for the fleet to travel so far, that it isn't suitable for a young woman like you to go to sea, and that perhaps Han Chi should stay behind while you remain at the residence to oversee things. The final sentence was written with particular force: "If you're willing to hand the merchant fleet back, your father will find a way to deal with the tribute porcelain quota." I folded the letter and handed it back to Uncle Yuan. Go back and tell father this, the 3-month deadline has passed. The shortfall in the tribute porcelain has been made up, and the fleet is now on the right track. From now on, I will decide for myself where the Jiang family fleet sails. What he should be worrying about isn't the fleet, but your elder sister's situation in the palace. Uncle Yuan opened his mouth, as if he wanted to persuade me, but when he saw the 3 ships behind me with their sails already fully raised, he ultimately said nothing. He merely bowed, then turned and ran back. Han Chi blew a whistle at the bow, as if it were the sailor's signal to weigh anchor. I stepped onto the gangplank and boarded the deck of the lead ship. Zhan followed behind me, carrying the bundle. She glanced back at the increasingly distant wharf and said softly, "Miss, are we really leaving just like this?" "What about the master?" "He has the delayed approval documents for the tribute porcelain at the residence, and a letter from elder sister in the palace. That should keep him busy for a while." The ship rocked, the anchor was hauled up, and the bow slowly turned toward the open sea. Han Chi stood beside the helm and took hold of the wheel. "Second miss, is our course set?" "East route. Luzon." When the first sail bellied in the wind, the pier had already become a gray line on the horizon. Zhan leaned against the ship's rail for a long while, then suddenly turned back and said, "Miss, when you handed Uncle Yuan your reply just now, I saw Lu Xian's men behind the pier. He was standing beneath the tea stall and didn't come over." "What did he see?" "He saw the ship leave." "Anne." Zhan hesitated. And a note fell from his hand. Before he picked it up, the wind flipped it over, and I caught sight of the plum blossom seal on it. My hand gripping the ship's rail did not move. The sea wind rushed into my face, scattering every sound from the land behind us. "Miss, where are we going?" "Forward." "Extra." Before dawn had fully broken, the library doors were already open. The newly arrived palace maid entered carrying a copper basin. Seeing someone already seated by the window, she froze for a moment, then hurriedly bent her knees in a curtsy. "Why are you up so early today, noble lady?" Jiang Shuiwei did not turn around. She was leafing through a file of records, its pages yellowed with age, the Jiangnan Weaving Bureau's income and expenditure ledger from 10 years ago. Her fingertip rested on a line. In the 5th year of Longcheng, the quota for tribute porcelain was increased by 30%. The handwriting was identical to the signature on the delayed approval document concerning the Jiang family that Lu Xian had delivered this year. "Noble lady?" the maid asked again. "Where shall I have today's breakfast served?" "Just put it on the desk." The palace maid withdrew. Jiang Shuiwei closed the file register and drew a paper slip, folded extremely thin, from her sleeve. She unfolded it. There were only 6 characters written on it: "The ship has left port. Eastern route." She recognized the handwriting. It was not Jiang Shuiwen's. Han Chi had had it passed along through the dockworkers, layer by layer, and one corner of the paper was still damp with a trace of moisture. "Eastern route," she murmured once, holding the slip to the candle flame. The tongue of fire curled up, the paper crumpled into ash, and fell into the copper basin, breaking into several pieces. She watched the ashes sink, while her fingertips still retained a little of the warmth where the edge of the paper had been singed. Footsteps sounded outside the window. An attendant announced from the corridor, "Your Highness, eunuch Sun from His Majesty's presence has arrived. He says he has a few words to convey." Jiang Shuiwei rose and smoothed her collar, slipping the dossier back into its original place on the bookshelf. By the time she turned around, her expression had already changed. When eunuch Sun entered, he saw her gazing intently at a piece of calligraphy and asked with a smile, "Lady Chiron, enjoying such refined pursuits?" "I had nothing else to do, so I was looking through some old records." "What brings you here today, eunuch Sun?" His Majesty inquired about the Jiangnan tribute porcelain. He heard that several merchants are unable to deliver their quota this year and wants to know whether your Highness is aware of the details. Jiang Shuai tucked the loose strands by her temple behind her ear and said evenly, I don't know much about the merchants. But I heard there's a Jiang family, and this batch has been submitted. Eunuch Sun nodded, exchanged a few more pleasantries, and then withdrew. The instant the door closed, Jiang Shuai sat back down by the window, her gaze returning to the spine of the register protruding from the bookshelf, the catalogue of tribute porcelain from the 10th year of Longcheng. Beneath the page bearing the Jiang family's name, she had scratched an extremely faint mark with her fingernail last night. Move forward. She let the two words linger on the tip of her tongue for a moment, then picked up her teacup and took a sip of water that had gone completely cold. The story has come to an end. Thank you all for your company, and see you in the next one.